All right, so let's just dive right in. Because honestly, there's a lot going on right now, and I feel like most people are not fully grasping the gravity of what we're looking at. We've got this whole Iran situation that everyone keeps calling a massive victory, and look, I'm going to push back on that pretty hard today. We've got Schiff out here basically pitching communism on YouTube and thinking it sounds reasonable. And then there's Japan, which, I genuinely think is one of the most underreported slow-motion train wrecks happening in the world right now. And it matters. It really, really matters. Because what's happening over there is basically a preview of what America is heading toward. So stick with me here. This is going to be a long one, but trust me, every single piece of this connects. Let's start with Iran, because this is what everyone's talking about. And I think the narrative around it is just completely wrong. So we have this Memorandum of Understanding, the MOU, that got signed between the US and Iran. And the way it's being presented in the media and the way Donald Trump is out there talking about it, you'd think we just won World War III. Total victory. America prevailed. Champagne everywhere. But if you actually sit down and look what's in this thing, it's a very different picture. So what does the MOU actually do? Two things basically. It creates a ceasefire, at least on paper, for a 60-day window, and it says the Strait of Hormuz is going to reopen. That's it. Those are the headline accomplishments. And okay, yeah, no more bombs flying around for now. The strait opens up. Fine. But here's the thing that just keeps nagging at me. Before we started this war, both of those things were already true. The strait was open. We weren't in a war. So if the biggest win we can point to is, hey, we got back to where we started, then what exactly did we accomplish? We went to war, spent an enormous amount of money, burned through a huge stockpile of ammunition and missiles and bombs that now need to be replaced, all of which costs more money. People died, and the price of oil and food shot up for everyone in the meantime. And now we're celebrating because we've returned to square one? That's not a victory. That's expensive nothing. Now Trump is out there saying, no, we really hurt them. We took out their Navy, their Air Force, a lot of their missile capability. And look, that's true. Iran's military capacity has been significantly degraded. But here's where it gets kind of awkward. Iran was never actually a direct military threat to the United States. Like, those fighter jets and those ships were not pointed at American soil. So yes, maybe they have less capacity to make trouble for their neighbours in the region, but from a pure American security standpoint, those weapons weren't keeping anyone up at night in Washington. And then there's a nuclear question, which Trump keeps holding up as this big triumph. He says the deal means Iran will never have a nuclear weapon. Okay, but what's actually in the MOU on this? Iran's promise. Just their word. They promised not to build nukes. And here's where I kind of lose the thread, because they were promising that before the war too. That was literally their position. We're developing nuclear capability for energy, not weapons. Trump's whole pre-war argument was that their promise was worthless, that we couldn't trust them, that words weren't enough. But now, after the war, the same promise from the same government is suddenly sufficient? What changed? If their word is good enough now, why wasn't it good enough before? I've seen the interview clips where Trump is asked about this, and his response is basically, well, it wouldn't be fair to tell Iran they can't have nuclear power when everyone else has it. Which, okay, fair point actually. But that's exactly what the Iranians were saying before the war started. So we went to war to arrive at the same position we could have just agreed to before any of this started. Now, there are going to be negotiations over the next 60 days, or however many days are left in this window. Negotiations about verification, inspections, something more concrete than a handshake and a promise. But that's all future tense. It hasn't happened. It's not in the MOU. The Iranians haven't committed to any of that yet. What they've committed to is repeating a statement they were already making before the first bomb dropped. And I should mention, this deal isn't even permanent. It can be extended. Both sides just have to agree, which is almost certainly what's going to happen. Trump himself has said in interviews that he can start bombing again whenever he feels like it, ceasefire or not. So the Strait of Hormuz is open in the same way a door is unlocked when someone's standing in front of it with their hand on the knob. There's still enormous uncertainty hanging over the oil market. Now here's the part that people really aren't talking about enough. What did Iran actually get out of this deal? Because from where I'm sitting, they got quite a bit. Sanctions are being lifted immediately. Iran can start selling oil again right now that it wasn't able to sell before. There's talk of this $300 billion investment fund that Iran will have access to. And look, we don't fully know where that money comes from. Trump says it won't be US taxpayers. Maybe Gulf nations chip in. But $300 billion is $300 billion. And what restrictions are there on how Iran uses it? Are they prohibited from using some of that economic breathing room to rebuild their military? Because nothing in the MOU says that. Money is fungible. You free up one source of funding, it frees up other money for other things. Plus, frozen Iranian assets get released back to Iran. Trump was actually asked about this in an interview. Why are you giving them their money back? And his response was basically, we can't just steal it. That would destroy confidence in holding assets in America. Which is true. But it's also a bit rich coming from the guy who started the war. And then, on top of all that, the regime is still there. This was a government that Trump specifically said would be gone. Regime change was the goal. Liberate the Iranian people. The malacracy would fall. Well, they're still there. The regime survived. And they know it. And their neighbors know it. So when you add it all up, Iran keeps its government, gets sanctions relief, gets oil revenue back, gets frozen assets back, gets access to a massive investment fund, and now has the narrative that they stood up to the most powerful military in the world and survived. I'm struggling to find where exactly the American victory is. Trump framed it as, we destroyed $1 trillion worth of their stuff and they only got $300 billion back, so they're still down. But most of what we destroyed was military hardware that wasn't contributing to Iran's economy. If you blow up someone's weapons and give them investment capital in exchange, that's actually a pretty good trade for them. And oh, by the way, all the bombs and missiles we use to do that damage, we have to replace all of that too. That's hundreds of billions more out of the American defense budget. And there's another thing I want to flag here. The US-Israel relationship seems to be fraying a bit. There's clearly some tension between Trump and Netanyahu right now. All right, let me shift gears here because I want to talk about what's happening domestically with this whole Elon Musk trillionaire story and how the left is using it. And specifically, I want to get into something Adam Schiff said that I think is really worth pulling apart. Now, I'll be honest, I find it slightly embarrassing that this man has the same last name as me. We are not related. So Schiff put out this video, you can find it on YouTube, and it's all about how terrible it is that Elon Musk is a trillionaire. He frames it as a failure. Not a success, a failure. And that framing alone tells you everything you need to know about the worldview here. Because think about what it actually means that the richest person on the planet lives in America. Isn't that good? According to Schiff, the reason someone becomes a trillionaire is a bad tax code. As if the government is somehow accidentally allowing Elon Musk to keep money that rightfully should be somewhere else. That is a genuinely backwards understanding of how wealth is created. Musk didn't take money from anyone. The wealth he has represents value that was created. His gain is not someone else's loss. That's not how capitalism works. He then says, imagine if we confiscated that $1 trillion and just distributed it. Every American household would get about $7,500, and he presents this as a good thing. Now, there are so many problems with this, I don't even know where to start. First of all, Musk doesn't have $1 trillion in cash sitting in a vault somewhere. His wealth is his ownership stake in SpaceX and Tesla. So the government would have to seize those shares and sell them into the market. Do you have any idea what happens to the stock price of Tesla and SpaceX if the government dumps Musk's entire position onto the market? You're not getting $1 trillion. You might get 200 billion if you're lucky, because the price would crater. So right away, your $7,500 per household is now more like $1,500. What does Elon Musk do now? He has no stake in his companies. Why would he keep working? And without Musk, what happens to SpaceX? What happens to Tesla? You've potentially destroyed 2 major companies and thousands of jobs in the process. And the message you've sent to every other entrepreneur in America is crystal clear. Don't get too successful. What does the average household actually do with $7,500? They spend it. They buy stuff. Mostly stuff made overseas. The trade deficit spikes. Prices go up. And within a month, maybe 2, the money is gone. You've torched accumulated capital that was funding future economic growth, and you've got a pile of receipts from Amazon and Walmart. You've eaten the seed corn. When someone like Musk keeps 98% of his wealth invested in his businesses, that capital is doing work. It's funding engineers, paying for research, building factories, launching rockets. That money is more productive in his hands than it would be distributed as consumption spending. Not because he's special, but because capital invested in productive enterprises grows the economy. There's this California ballot measure that actually got qualified by a 5% annual wealth tax on net worth above about $1.1 billion. Take someone like Zuckerberg, by worth somewhere around $220 billion, almost all of it in Meta stock. A 5% annual wealth tax means he owes something like $10 to $11 billion a year. But he doesn't have that in cash. He'd have to sell stock every year. That's an enormous amount of stock hitting the market continuously. Any entrepreneur with half a brain is reading this and asking themselves, why am I still here? The exodus has already started. And if it passes, it wouldn't just drive away billionaires, it would drive away millionaires too. Nevada's right across the border. Texas and Florida aren't far. There are plenty of states that will actually treat you well for being successful. Okay, so now I want to shift to Japan, because this is the one I really want you to pay attention to. The Japanese yen has been weakening, and when I say weakening, I mean it's in genuine trouble. We're sitting at around 161.5 yen to the dollar as I'm recording this. A dollar buys you more and more yen, which means the yen is getting less and less valuable. Now, the Bank of Japan has been intervening, trying to hold the line, threatening action. But we've seen this movie before with Japan. Remember when they set their line in the sand on the 10-year Japanese government bond yield? They were unable to defend that line. The 30-year Japanese government bond has touched 4% recently, and I think there's more to come. Japan's national debt is around 250% of GDP. That's roughly double what the United States carries. If interest rates in Japan rise to 4%, which is not some extreme scenario, the Japanese government would be spending about 2/3 of its entire annual tax revenue just on interest payments. 2/3. There's almost nothing left for anything else. This is a slow-motion fiscal catastrophe. And what makes it worse is the feedback loop it creates. As the yen weakens, import prices go up, and Japan imports a huge amount, including most of its food and energy. Import prices right now are up something like 25% year over year. Every door leads to another problem. But here's why this matters for us beyond just Japan. What we're watching in Japan is a preview. The trajectory is the same. Debt piled on debt, deficits that never close, interest payments crowding out everything else. America is on the same road. Our debt to GDP is lower, but we're heading the same direction, and we don't have Japan's advantages. Hank Paulson, of all people, has actually said publicly that we need a break the glass emergency plan for when the fiscal crisis hits. But a reactive plan to deal with a crisis that's already exploding is not reassuring. That's just hoping the ER is good enough when you've been ignoring the chest pains for 20 years. And then there's gold. Recently, gold sold off about $50 in a single session. We're sitting around $4,135 as I'm recording this. A lot of this pullback is being driven by tough talk out of the Fed, the new Fed chair making noise about price stability and fighting inflation, and the market kind of buying into that narrative. But I don't buy it. I think this is cheap talk. It's easy to give a speech about being tough on inflation. The hard part is actually doing the things you need to do. The Fed's balance sheet actually expanded again last week by $11 billion. So the new Fed chair is out here talking about inflation discipline, and his own institution is expanding the money supply in the same week. That's not exactly walking the walk. The gold pullback, in my view, is not a signal that things are improving. It's a buying opportunity. The structural forces driving gold higher, debt, deficits, monetary expansion, geopolitical uncertainty, none of that has gone away. And Japan is one of the clearest examples of what that endgame looks like, playing out in real time. I'll say it plainly. These governments, the US, Japan, most of Western Europe, they are all inching toward a day of reckoning. Every year we go further down this road. Every year the debt gets bigger, the deficits don't close, the interest payments get harder to manage. And we keep adding to the problem instead of subtracting from it. The problem isn't that we lack analysis. The problem is the political incentive structure makes it impossible to act. Nobody gets elected by telling people it's time for austerity. They get elected by promising more, spending more. And so the cycle continues. They're riding the gravy train, but the tracks end somewhere. Anyway, that's where we are. Iran, wealth taxes, Japan, all connected by the same thread of governments spending more than they have, and everyone hoping the problem somehow resolves itself. If you found this useful, go ahead and leave a comment below. Give it a thumbs up if you want to see more. Take care of yourselves.